We'll give everyone just a moment to make sure their connections are working. All right, everyone. So my name is Katie Adams. I will be hosting our workshop on the final countdown, preparing for finals. And so I am a supplemental instruction graduate assistant from the Student Academic Resource Center, and we're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to take a moment, if we have anyone here who has to kind of be here for some type of attendance purposes, please let us know and we will work with you to get those paperwork filled out. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll get started. So just for a workshop preview, we are going to talk a little bit about what SARC is, what we offer and do at SARC. We're going to talk about the 5 different types of studying and creating a planned study, and then a little bit about test anxiety and other resources to help you kind of prepare for the exam and combat some of the struggles that you might be having preparing for finals. All right, so about SARC Services. We have several services here at SARC, a few that we have had, sorry, just a second. So a few that we've had normally in the past, so things like peer tutoring, supplemental instruction, and ACE coaching. With that, peer tutoring and supplemental instruction are a little bit more of the typical types of scheduled activities that we host, peer tutoring being a little bit more of the normal tutoring you experience, and the SI is going to have an SI leader who sits in your class and is going to be a little bit more one-on-one with the instructor and understanding what is happening in an individual course. We also have academic coaching and engagement, and these ACE coaches help kind of prepare you for the broader spectrum of studying and engaging your courses, making sure you're able to time manage and understand your courses in that perspective. This semester, we also have added in a online instructional peer coaching. So we also highly recommend these as we've moved into the virtual platform. They're here to really help you understand what's going on in your courses and understand the different types of aspects of navigating web courses and understanding like different types of things with proctoring and navigating the online atmosphere that we're currently experiencing. One of the things that we also have, which you guys are here for today, are our academic success workshops. We host these throughout the semester in partnership with several of our other on-campus resources. We also, in the case, have a few that are pre-recorded, and so we highly recommend kind of looking through our SARC website and going through some of the different types of workshops that we've already hosted and pre-recorded for you guys to see what other types of skills that you might need help with. We also then have SARC Online, which is resources that are offered 24/7, and these resources range from different types of pamphlets and worksheets to kind of help you understand your types of studying or managing test anxiety, to kind of looking individually into specific types of courses, whether you're struggling in biology or chemistry type courses, or even our engineering and CECS courses. So please go ahead, take a look at that. We'll have the SARC website linked towards the end, so if you need that as a resource, we have updated our website URL. So please make sure to take a look at that. All right, so really kind of what our main topic that we want to talk about is finals. So I want to go ahead, you can either enable your mics or go ahead and drop in the chat, but just overall, how is everyone feeling about finals? Take a moment, let me know. Awesome, Jessica, I definitely agree. Nervous is an understatement in navigating this new environment. Thanks. Okay, we also have some who say low stress. Need, first time in college, that's definitely understandable. It can be kind of difficult navigating things. Pretty good. All right, one class. Bit nervous, slowly rising to get closer. Ethan, that's definitely understandable too. And we'll talk about some of these things. Just worried that I might forget. Joelle, that's always one of my biggest things. I'm always so nervous. I always second guess myself if I might forget. And then Christian, pretty chillin', just a bit of limbo of not knowing. That's definitely true. I think especially kind of just this environment has caused a lot of uncertainty with not knowing what's really going on. And I definitely recommend making sure to constantly keep asking your professors. You know, checking the syllabus is good, but professors are constantly kind of not sure as well in this environment. So please make sure to reach out to your professors. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those ways to kind of navigate understanding what to be expected. All right, so don't panic. That's kind of what this workshop is going for. We don't want to, you know, cause anyone to, you know, think finals are overly bad. And we're going to talk about kind of navigating it. And we want to make sure that you understand here at SARC, we definitely have a lot of resources and we got you back. So a few things that we want to make sure we're considering. So how you study and when you study. And so those are really two of the big breakdowns for this workshop that we're going to talk about. And so my first question, other than how are we feeling about finals, is what do you think is important when you study? So again, if a few people want to go ahead and let me know, like, what do you think is important for you when you study, or how is your studying going? What's maybe working for you? Go ahead and drop in the chat. Awesome, Janine. Being present and focused is definitely important right now. Being present and focused is really going to be a lot of different steps within the types of studying that we're going to look at. And so being present and focused is really kind of that first step. Mel has quiet and calming environment. That's actually a really good tip. Having a good environment is really good in helping you kind of focus and make sure you stay on track. Joelle, spreading out my work and study. Excellent. We don't want to cram. That's always going to be one of the big tips that you hear all your SI leaders or tutors and even coaches kind of talking about. We want to make sure that we're letting things, you know, have time to sink in. We're not trying to cram everything and overload ourselves. And then Ethan, you know, kind of on top of that, make sure you're taking breaks away from the computer. That's an excellent tip. Making sure you just kind of take that step away. And with Cassie, she tends to color code notes and have the same environment every time. And so those are some really good, excellent kind of skills and tips to make sure, you know, we're really getting into that studying and making sure we're understanding what we're looking at. Awesome. So for our 5 types of studying, let's talk about how to study. So one, we're really going to want to start with studying to gather information. Depending on the types of finals that you guys are looking at or going to have, this is really, if you're looking at a cumulative final, hopefully this is something that we've already kind of started to do. If you're maybe having a final that's only going to focus on the last portion of material, this might be where you're beginning right now. Step 2, studying is studying to learn information. And so this is going to be kind of evolving from step 1, but making sure that we're actually learning what they're telling us. And then step 3, we're going to check for the learning. And so just various types of making sure we're keying into the information that's being presented and that we're actually able to absorb what we're looking at. Step 4 is studying to refresh. So again, if you're looking at a cumulative exam, this is really a good time to make sure we're refreshing the information that maybe we're learning at the beginning of the semester. And this is really just making sure that, you know, we have all of this material and we're able to kind of look at it together. And then step 5 is studying to improve, and that's our last type of studying. This is really going to make sure we're being active and that we're looking at a lot of the information. So the next kind of question is, okay, what do these types of studying really refer to and what are they looking at? And so for studying to gather information, we're really looking at a couple main categories. And so we want to make sure to gather the information, we want to question ourselves, what do we need to learn? And so oftentimes our teachers are going to kind of provide this information for us. So whether this is in form of study guides or maybe lecture and chapter notes, we're really going to be looking at kind of just gathering this actual information. This might be your first step in taking notes. So you want to make sure you're organizing, maybe condensing and recording that information. So whether in form of note cards, Cornell notes, or outlines, this is really good time to figure out what type of notes really work best for you. I know right now it's really popular to see like those really pretty aesthetic type notes, and that's good, but if that doesn't really help you remember anything or really organize your material, maybe it's not really helping you that way. And then, is it right? So making sure that the information we're compiling is actually correct. So whether you're confirming with your classmates and comparing your notes with them, or making sure that the professor can kind of confirm the material and make sure what you are understanding is what they're trying to teach you. So again, this is really the first type of level that we're at. And so depending on what type of exam you're going to be looking at, or maybe what type of project you're going to have to submit, this might be the stuff that you were maybe looking more towards at the beginning of the semester. Hopefully you were learning at the beginning of the semester if you have an accumulative exam, and then you're not just trying to cram everything in the week before. And then lastly, if you have more of an exam towards the last material, this might still be a little bit where you're at. You're still kind of gaining this last bit of information that your teacher's trying to get to you. And so a lot of these steps are still going to be really important if that's the case. And then so for step 2, studying to learn information. This is going to start being a little bit more of where we get into our different types of study skills. And so we want to make sure we're actually remembering the information. So we're going to look at repetition, making sure we're not, just memorizing things, but we're also maybe understanding the components behind it. If you're in a chemistry course, you don't want to just memorize maybe all of the elements, but you're going to want to understand maybe like, okay, these elements are metals versus non-metals. What does that really mean? And maybe also a really good type of form of studying is study groups. One of the things I like to emphasize with study groups is that the studying that happens in these groups, you want to be productive. So maybe studying with your best friend might not always be the best idea if that's just going to become a bigger distraction. Looking for people who are going to challenge you and really help you kind of progress with the studying in the class is really what you want to look for. So, look for the students with maybe better grades, or look for the students who, maybe are really struggling, but are really good at kind of coming up with materials and overcoming the struggles in the class. We also, in terms of learning information, we want to make sure that we're starting our learned and our not yet learned material. So ask your professor or classmates questions, get creative with tough concepts, make sure that you're checking off if you've learned a topic and you're not constantly going back to the same topic to kind of reiterate the information if we have 6 other topics that you haven't really touched on and you're not really sure what they're talking about yet. And then for the last step here, we want to make sure we don't procrastinate. And so create a master blueprint in this case. Coming up with your own study guide is often a really good way to kind of make sure you are looking at the material overall. Make sure you're defining your priorities. Again, if you have a couple subjects that you're not quite as good on, but you've mastered these other 2, you don't really need to keep looking at the 2 you've mastered. You want to make sure you're hitting the ones that you haven't looked at as much. Minimum of 2 hours study time outside of class for every 1 credit hour in your schedule. This sounds like a lot, but we'll talk a little bit about kind of getting that in and maybe how we can prioritize some of these types of studying habits for your credit hours. And then just looking at a semester at a glance, making sure you look at, overall, what topics have I looked at? What topics, even if it's not an cumulative exam, are going to help me understand this last bit of material? Just kind of overall looking at what is going to help you best be successful on this last exam. So that also might include looking back at previous quizzes or exams. And so we're really just kind of wanting to make sure we're wrapping everything up to make sure we've actually accessed all the information that we should be learning. All right, and then our step 3 is studying to check for learning. So our first 3, again, are really big in this first part of learning information. And so here we're getting to the point where we want to make sure we are self-testing and being really active with our learning. So self-test understanding the test format is hopefully where we're all at by now. Hopefully there's at least been one exam or one type of project that has been similar to what you're looking forward to with finals. And knowing that test format is going to be really helpful in kind of just formatting your own types of practice questions or understanding what you should be looking at in terms of key terms or ideas for your test. And so with that, try to test yourself 2 to 3 times each week. This can be really good if you make really good types of flashcards, for instance. If you are really good at highlighting maybe topics rather than just looking at the definitions, or if you're really good at kind of inverting questions. So inverting questions is one of the things I want to highlight here. I find it to be a really good source for yourself. So if you come up with a test question or you have maybe some practice questions, try to form an inverted question. So what if they were asking the opposite of what the question was asking? What would that change about the topic? Or what if we were to take out a few different words? Or what if we were to rearrange a couple of the different types of sentences within the question? How can we really change and test ourselves in that way is a really good way to make sure we are self-testing ourselves to not just memorize the questions and answers, but to really understand the material. And then my last part for this is, do you actually know it? And so we want to make sure we're checking for accuracy and completeness. Don't let yourself slide. Make sure you're trying to maybe teach it to someone else. So again, try study groups, try making sure you're keeping yourself accountable, whether that's through some type of time management skills or making sure you are actually going back and re-looking at all the different topics and material that you should be learning. And so one of the things that we want to get into is really making sure that we're active with learning. And that's one of the things I can't stress enough. And so really, we want to make sure we're overcoming the components of why do we forget? And so I know that was already mentioned, making sure you don't forget what's happening and making sure that, you're being really present and making sure you're just actually getting the material in. And so there's several reasons as why we forget. And so change clues in a question, and that's why it's really good for self-testing. Interference, so you want to make sure you have that kind of natural environment, that you're consistently in a quiet environment where you can focus or kind of maintain one type of topic. You also want to make sure you're not mental overcrowding or negative thinking. And so negative thinking is also an important way, and we'll talk a little bit more about negative thinking towards the end of our topic. But maintaining positivity toward yourself is really important, and we want to make sure that we're not letting, your self-doubt or any of those types of things get in the way of really being able to learn the material. And then underlearning and disuse is really important. Why we want to look at repetition. We want to make sure, hey, I know I've actually looked at this topic. I know I've actually practiced and I've reread or I've redone my notes. And then effort and intention are lacking. So here we want to make sure we are actually putting in the effort to learn or effort to go over our notes from previous sections in the class. And those types of things, we want to make sure we are really putting the time and effort into our studying. And so we want to make sure as we get into our last steps of studying that we're making sure we are revisiting again this learned material. We want to make sure we're beating that fade out. So we want to make sure we're reviewing 2 to 3 times a week. And again, we want to really emphasize that you have a little bit of time to study individually and study with a group. So we want to make sure we're challenging yourself and making sure you yourself know the material, but then allowing others to come along and challenge you and give you new ideas or new ways to test yourself that you might not have been thinking of. And finally, with studying to improve learning, use your results as feedback. So use other resources, make sure you're looking at previous exams. What types of questions were you were mostly correct, mostly incorrect, maybe even in your practice questions, kind of keep a pile. If you got a question correct and you knew it right away, put it in the good pile. If you got a question wrong, put it in your review pile. recall thoughts during your tests. So making sure you have different ways to kind of memorize things, whether maybe you're using mnemonics or ways to quite, memorize something that wasn't as obvious in terms of understanding the mechanism. Modify and replace learning skills accordingly. So if you know you took a last exam and you did not do as well as you had planned, maybe reiterate what were your study skills, how often did you study, what were some things that you noticed worked really well, and what were the things that did not work well. Take those things out that did not work well, emphasize the things that did, and maybe try a few other skills that you haven't tried before. We don't want to try all new study skills because obviously at this point, hopefully, we have some good ones built up, but it's still a good time to try new things, especially if you're kind of first time in college or if it's the first time in this type of subject. And then utilizing resources is going to be really important. So SARC Tutoring and SI are here to help you. Again, we have a variety of subjects. We have these scheduled throughout the week, and they are available to kind of help you guys make sure you're understanding the material, but you're also being active in learning the type of material. We also have the University Writing Center if you have more of a project writing based final. And then we also have some online tools that we recommend. We have our SARC Online and our Opal or our online resources. We also have some hybrid resources that we're looking at this semester. We also have Khan Academy and a few other really good types of online tools that can be offered through your SI leaders or peer tutors. We also recommend then, looking at maybe an A student or a TA or some type of learning assistant that's offered through the course. And as always, I recommend the professor. They are obviously the source of knowledge for your course. So making sure you, go to office hours or reach out to your professor if you're really not understanding a topic. They're the best way to make sure you're getting the most accurate material. And so again, just kind of reiterating, practice active learning is going to be the most important. So attending that lecture, reading, making sure you're listening maybe to the lecture videos and demonstrating that you can understand the material are all really important. And they're those primary levels that we're looking at. And so the average student retention rate, however, are much lower for these as then if we moved up to discussing in a group, making sure we're doing practice exams or even trying to teach others and help them get through the material. This is really going to help increase the retention rate that we're looking for. And so just a moment, I'm going to go ahead and actually drop in a document for you guys that just kind of helps reiterate some of those notes for you. And so if you kind of want to look at some other hints that we have for preparing for the exam or different types of studying, I would definitely recommend looking at this PDF that I just added into the chat. It really emphasizes some of our main tips and the 5 types of studying that we talked about today. And so I would definitely recommend looking into that and making sure you really understand the types of learning and studying that we were talking about. Oh. One moment. All right. And so do we have any questions about the 5 types of studying and kind of looking forward to practicing for our final exam? If not, I'd want to get a quick poll from you guys. What are your favorite ways to study for finals? Or if you haven't studied for finals so far and it's your first time in college, what is your favorite way to study that you've had so far this semester? What's worked best for you? Awesome, Janine. Yes, I definitely agree. So I see we have teaching others or someone else the information. that's a really great way. And as we can see, you know, in our active learning, that is really going to help with kind of retaining that information. And I often found as a previous SI leader that helping others kind of understand the information is a really good way, especially when you're teaching someone who has no idea what you're talking about. Trying to relate it to everyday life and those types of experiences are really, really helpful in making sure you are actively thinking about material and trying to relate it to other things. I see Cassie with flashcards, and I also see Christian had note cards. And Ethan also had note cards with writing key ideas in bright, vibrant colors. So note cards in general, I agree, are a really great way to kind of do this practice, self-studying, self-testing as well. And these are really good ways to kind of, you know, not just make sure we are at the level of, you know, demonstrating the knowledge, but, you know, practice what we're doing. And so these are an excellent way to kind of get in that self-studying and make sure we're doing a lot of that review. I also really like the vibrant colors that Ethan mentioned. Colors are definitely one of my favorite things. They're really good at kind of adding that visual with what's going on with your practice. I also see that we mentioned some Pomodoro method, and that is a really good study skill that actually a lot of people have gotten into lately. So I would definitely recommend in this case, we have an app called Forest. There's a few other free apps. Forest is both a little free. There's also some add-ins, but if you just want the free resource, it will help you build a tree as you study. For a set amount of time. I definitely recommend. It kind of helps you keep from touching your phone. It really just builds a tree as you go through studying. If you open your phone, the tree unfortunately dies. And I really, you know, like to see my forest grow. And so in that case, I definitely recommend the Pomodoro method and trying different apps or different functions. There's a few that you can also put on your computer to kind of help you maintain that Pomodoro method. I also saw we mentioned talking out loud. This is a really good way to get that audio visual that is mentioned. It's also a really good way if you kind of build in a discussion aspect with the talking out loud. This is just an excellent skill to kind of make sure you're utilizing a few different parts of your brain as you go through your studying process. I also see Janine mentioned practice problems and saying, you know, why you did each step. And so those are really good ways to kind of, you know, go through and practice, but then also make sure you're double checking your understanding. Making sure you're having those follow-up questions are also really important. So those are all excellent ways. I really like that you guys are already kind of having some study skills that are really working for you. All right, and so our next portion that we're going to talk about is, all right, but when am I supposed to do all this? You know, how am I supposed to fit all this in? And so we have 168 hours in a week. And so if you're looking at 12 hours for class, you know, 56 hours of sleep if you are really getting that good 8 hours a night, and 21 hours of eating if you're looking to, you know, make sure you're getting proper nutrition and maintaining that proper health. Left over, if you subtract all that time, you still have 79 hours left. And so if you maybe have a job and you're looking at part-time and you're working those 20 hours, you would still have an additional maybe 25 hours that you could have for socializing, relaxing, but then that would still leave 34 hours that we can atone for our studying. And so we really do have time if we're looking at our schedule and actually making sure we're managing our time properly. We are not telling you, you know, as finals come up, to just dedicate your time solely to studying and making sure you memorize all the material. You know, we're just saying allot the time that you really need to prioritize for your class and making sure you're just utilizing the best types of study skills or types of studying to really gain the knowledge in the best way possible. And so they often say failing to plan is planning to fail. And so I actually have our second document that I want to go ahead and drop in. And so, 1 second. So here is a really good document that is set up to kind of help you guys start planning. And so it's our fall finals time management, and it's going to allow you to kind of plan in a few different ways. All right. All right, so that should now be in the chat if you want to go ahead and take a look. All right, and so there are a couple different ways to kind of go ahead and plan. If you look in the document, there is a schedule that goes through the end of November through finals. There is kind of like that full month calendar view, basically. There's also a checklist to kind of go ahead and set up a checklist for each day and prioritize what you need to be looking at. And then there's also a schedule builder to allow you guys to kind of plan by hour. And so depending on what is the best way for you to plan, I would definitely kind of try out a few different ways. I would definitely say, at least making sure you know when your finals are is going to be kind of a good first step. And so within that, what do you guys think or what works best for you in terms of time management? Are you a checklist type of person, or are you a calendar type person? Are you the type of person that needs to write every goal that you need to finish out? Please go ahead and let me know in the chat. Awesome. So I see Quinn, Cassie, we have some to-do lists, checklists. Yes, awesome. And Jessica, I love to make to-do lists and cross them all off. I definitely agree. Crossing things off my to-do list is a really, really satisfying thing for me. I am one of those people who I like to kind of write everything out, break everything down. And so kind of finding out what motivates you best is really, really important. I see Janine also has a planner for Zoom out events and important dates to lists for Zoom in assignments and due dates for the week. That's awesome. So I think there's a few really good points that you added in. And so a planner is also really important. We're not necessarily going to have a checklist for everything we need to do in a semester. So having a planner that kind of allows us to write down, important times that we maybe need to be in class or important times that we have due dates is also really essential, and making sure we're just looking at everything overall. And so that is really why I added that first page in for the handout, making sure we look and we know when maybe our assignments are due and our finals are actually occurring is really the first step in making sure we look at everything for finals overall. Making sure kind of for that second one, we have some checklists. So, making sure we have a plan is the first step. But knowing what really needs to happen and prioritizing what needs to happen is going to really help you be the most successful. So I would say prioritizing, I know, for instance, this assignment is due first and I have a lot done, but I know the second one has a lot more I need to do and it's close in timeline. I would definitely say maybe working on both of them intermittently is going to be the best option. If you know, for instance, if you're looking at a final and you are going into the final and saying, I'm really confident about my first final, but I'm really not as confident about my second final, maybe prioritizing and adding a little more study time for your second final is going to be the best option since you're pretty confident about the first one. We don't want to not study for the first one, but if we're pretty confident about the material, adding a little additional time for the second one is going to really be the best option to make sure we're doing well in all of our classes. And so making sure when you're doing your studying plan that you're not just studying for your first exam and then your second exam is definitely going to kind of get to the point where you might be studying 5 days for the first exam, but then your second exam is only a day away. So making sure we are balancing everything out and we are remembering a few other things when looking at our kind of planning and studying out everything out. We want to make sure we're keeping in mind, be specific, break it down, and then most importantly, be realistic. So with finals, I definitely would recommend not looking forward to, just cutting out all sleep. You want to make sure you are not doing anything super drastic. Don't try and start a diet plan the week before finals. Don't start chugging 6 cups of coffee to try and get through everything. Make sure you're pacing everything out and be realistic with yourself. If you are, getting to the point where you thought you were going to get your prints and all of your study guides done on day 1, and you look and it's almost 10 o'clock at night and you've only gotten through maybe 2 of your 4 study guides, it's okay. It's one of those things that as long as you have the realistic and you have planned yourself out to make sure you've started with the most important study guide or the first deadline study guide, I would definitely recommend you let yourself go, make sure you're maintaining those healthy habits and still getting enough sleep, and being realistic with yourself. Do we have any issues or concerns that we've had with kind of planning for finals or, just overall managing your time with studying? All right. So if you guys have any questions about kind of planning things out, I would definitely recommend kind of looking into a few different types of YouTube channels. And so I've actually learned a lot about planning out through some YouTubers who have some like lower channels, but they talk a lot about time management and kind of keeping the motivation. One of my other additional tips is that we see kind of in our example down here, we have, for example, like print articles or read chapter 10. These action words are actually good motivators. So making sure that in your to-do list, you're not just writing out like chapter 10, you're writing out what you need to do with chapter 10. Maybe you've already read it and now you need to do an outline. Maybe instead of doing an outline, you want to make some practice questions. Make practice questions. You don't want to just write chapter 10. It's going to kind of create an effect that's unmotivating, but also might just lead you to be like, okay, I have chapter 10, but why did I write it down? So again, be really specific. Look at other examples if you've never really done checklists or have maybe made checklists and never find yourself making your way through them. Also making sure that we break it down. So I often find that just writing a goal, it can be very vague. So if you just want to say study for such and such final, maybe you're going for bio 1, you say study for bio 1 final. That's great, but that's very vague. We don't know, maybe I need to study the cycles for bio 1, or maybe I need to look at the cell. We don't really know what we're referring to if we're just saying bio 1, and that can kind of be unmotivating and seem like a much larger problem than what you were really intending for. So break it down, make sure you're looking at, only a small chunk, realistic chunk at that time. We want to make sure that as we're going forward, we're really understanding what we're trying to give ourselves in terms of a plan. We want to make sure it's, again, being reasonable with yourself and maintaining kind of a good balance within that studying and lifestyle habits is the end goal here. And so moving into kind of our third portion of our workshop. So, but what if I panic? So I, for instance, had a lot of panic when I was first in college and getting into their exams. I had a lot of test anxiety, especially when things weren't like standard to the book. So if an exam didn't start on time, or maybe a professor was late or something was happening that just didn't seem right, I had a lot of anxiety. And so first off, before we get into some of our tips and tricks, for those of you, what are some maybe like habits, or what are some things that you do on the day or the day before an exam that really allow you to kind of control that anxiety and prepare for the exam? What are some ways that you guys use? Awesome, Sherlyn. I definitely agree. Deep breaths is a go-to. It can really happen at any time, depending on when you kind of feel that anxiety. So maybe you are studying the night before the exam and you start to feel like really anxious. You're like, oh my gosh, I feel like I know this, but maybe I don't. Maybe I do know this. And then, or even during the exam, if you get to a question, you're like, oh my gosh, I read it. I know it was happening, but what am I supposed to do? Like, I don't know the answer. Just kind of take that moment to yourself. I remember one of my best tips from a previous professor was, if you are in an exam, 10 seconds to yourself is not going to be the end of the world. Close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, and kind of just centering yourself is really important. We see Cassie saying, remind myself that I can't learn anything new today. And that is also excellent. We don't want to cram. You are not going to be able to learn an entire cycle the hour before an exam. You're not going to be able to maybe memorize all of the mechanisms or all of the things that you suddenly just start, being worried about. So just being more confident in yourself and making sure that you kind of, pace yourself well before is really important, but then also just making sure that you're feeling comfortable enough with yourself before that exam that, even if we get to the end and maybe you didn't remember one of the questions or one of the sections, it is not going to be the end of the world. And you kind of find that within yourself that you can't really ever learn everything new today. Ethan, get up early and do a final check that I have everything I will need. That is excellent. Especially I think in terms of this Zoom environment, I feel like I'm constantly missing something. So if you really have kind of that test proctor or something that you're going to need for your final, you want to make sure you have it early. If you maybe have your test in person, when we had our test in person, kind of making sure we had all those tools that we need. If you're at home, making sure maybe you have scratch paper or pens and pencils ready and your desk is prepared is also really important. Maybe doing that early, or I sometimes like to do it the night before, just making sure I have everything cleared off my desk so I don't have to worry about it the next day. Really important. I see Janine saying, take breaths, going on walks to empty her mind. It reminds me that this is the only small part of my life to go on to bigger things. And that is a really good mindset. So just kind of taking that time to yourself, making sure you have a little bit of me time to just kind of center yourself again and just kind of relax your mind is really important. Those who don't relax and kind of just let it build up are really going to be where they end up panicking. And that's what we want to make sure we're avoiding. And so for test anxiety, we have quite a few things that we want to look at. Being nervous and caring about your grades is totally normal and is good if it's motivating you to study or to, be active in your classes. However, we just want to make sure if we have frequent anxiety and it's not just occurring, at a mild level or just around the time that you're, prepping for an exam, we want to make sure we do have, some of those resources for you guys. So CAPS, maybe talk to a counselor at CAPS is a really good resource. They are doing Zoom sessions right now. So definitely if you feel that maybe you have more anxiety than you should, I definitely recommend talking to them. If you know you have a lot of anxiety, also Student Accessibility Services is a really good option, trying to talk to them and seeing what types of resources they might be able to help you guys with. And then last is more of those coping skills and or medication. So, I think everyone at this point has seen this meme, but you don't want to be this dog if you are constantly having anxiety around test taking or, preparing for exams. This is not where we want to be. It's not fine. So making sure if you have a lot of this frequent anxiety, you do definitely go and talk to people that can help. And so, just kind of, again, some of the things to do before the exam, make sure you're studying smarter. So we talked about the 5 different types of studying, making sure we're at where we kind of should be in terms of preparing for our finals and making sure we have a plan if maybe we, are a little ahead or maybe even a little behind, and just making sure we get to where you need to be. And so letting yourself be anxious is also really okay. It can be that kind of motivation that you might need. Nothing diminishes anxiety faster than action. So taking that anxiety and letting it motivate you to, maybe study that extra hour one day, or, maybe taking that time out for yourself and thinking about, okay, this is not the end of the world. It is just a small part of my life is really important. And then also writing it out. So acknowledging how you feel and writing out maybe what you're anxious about can be really helpful in you understanding maybe what your goals should look like. So if you notice that you're constantly stressing about not making it to a certain part of a chapter, or maybe not understanding a certain aspect of a class, that is a really good way to be like, oh, I did not realize, like, maybe I should relook at it in another way. Maybe I should try a different form of studying. And again, maybe if it ends up being consistent concern, maybe reaching out to someone and seeing maybe how they can help, whether that is reaching out to someone to talk about in terms of a counselor, or maybe even reaching out to get more academic resource help. And then we also want to make sure before the exam you're preparing. So gather your necessary materials, practice setting up the exam. And so big one here, some of you may be in classes that are in person. Some of you may be in classes that have been virtual the entire time. But either way, after Thanksgiving, we should all be virtual. So if you have virtual proctor for your final exam, it's a really good time to make sure you know how that works and that you have all the things that you might need. So I know, for instance, Honor Lock often requires kind of like a facial and a desk scan. You'll also need to make sure you have like your student ID. So just making sure that you have all of those things to kind of prep yourself for that exam is really important. And then on the test day, so before the exam, we have that deep breathing technique, making sure you kind of, are able to center yourself. We have a few other like power poses. If you're a person that likes to maybe like work out, maybe taking yourself on a short like workout in the morning to kind of just, center yourself and kind of keep a routine. Listening to music, thinking positively is also a really big one. So if you're that person, again, if you're constantly anxious or maybe even constantly negative about your schoolwork or your studying or how just maybe events are going to go, talking to a counselor is really important. Making sure that positive self-talk is just super important. You want to make sure you're motivated and amped for the exam. Even if you're not 100% on all the topics, it's not going to be the end of the world. No professor is going to pick that one topic to write all, maybe 50 questions about. So it's not going to be the end of the world. You want to make sure you are arriving early or setting up early to the exam. You want to also maybe get a little bit of a pep talk. So maybe have a friend or someone else in the class, or maybe even a family member to kind of just help talk you through something, whether they need to talk you up for the exam or maybe they need to just help you kind of take that deep breath and help focus you is really important. And then on the test day, just always go with your first instinct. Second guessing yourself. I know personally I missed so many questions in my first couple of years because I was just constantly second guessing myself. I even still do it occasionally. So this is one of the hardest, I think, to overcome. But, your first instinct is usually going to be the right one. If you've really studied and you kind of are familiar with what's going on and you're even not sure, your first instinct's usually correct. Answering questions worth the most amount of points is also a really good key. Starting there can be really helpful at making sure maybe if you think you may not have enough time, that you at least get through the majority of the points offered on the exam. Also, skipping harder questions and coming back to them at the end is a really good way to kind of just make sure you're getting through as much as possible. And then stay focused, taking those deep breaths to relax. 10 seconds again to yourself is not going to be the end of the world. And then take your time, making sure, you're actually able to read through everything, read through all your answer choices. That's really going to be the best way to make sure you actually were able to successfully answer those questions. Finishing quickly does not always mean an A. Sometimes the person who finishes first is the person who just really didn't have any idea what was going on. So we want to make sure that you're taking the time that you need to answer the questions to the best of your ability. And then develop your own style. So we talked a lot about different types of study skills, or some ways to go ahead and prepare and schedule for the exams. But ultimately the ideas expressed are just a starting point. And so everyone's learning style or feelings towards, taking exams are going to be different. Some people might feel really calm about taking an exam, while other people feel really anxious about, taking the exam. So it's totally normal if you have that type of spectrum. And what works well for some people might not work well for others. As always, seeing what works best for you, whether you need to try going through different resources, maybe if, for instance, you need the additional help and you tried peer tutoring, you might find ACE coaching was a better fit in that one-on-one environment, or you might find, the active learning from SI leaders might work better, or maybe even a combination of the three. Similarly, if you find, different types of studying styles work better for you, trying to combine them with some from other people is really a good way to find, oh, maybe something else works better than you thought it did. And ultimately, college is just a time to be flexible and creative. So reflect on the experiences that you have, try experimenting, and try new things to help identify what strategies really are going to work best for you on test day, or even in terms of studying. Try and find, what motivates you to do well, and then use the resources, opportunities you have as a student to develop your own style and approach to studying for finals. Ultimately, taking what we've given you and creating it to yourself is really going to be what best helps you. And then if you're still worried, develop a UCF support team. Reaching out to the professor and academic advisor is really important. We also have, financial assistance if you're really worried about, financial aid. Career services is also really big, and trying to maybe, find different experiences, or, trying to relate your classes to maybe what you want to do later on. We also have CAPS, again, which is really good if you need to talk things through. We have the Student Academic Resource Center if you just need more time with the material, and that's totally fine. Sometimes people just need more practice, or sometimes people just need that additional repetition from someone else, because reading it might just not work for you. And then UCF Cares is also a really good option if you have if you're worried about yourself, or maybe even someone else, and you just need to find additional resources. They're a really good place to contact and see what else is available for you. Additionally, UCF websites is a really good way to kind of, go through those resources yourself. And then last, make sure you're reaching out to friends, your roommates, maybe a study buddy, and even family, as they can really be some of the best support and offer you different views on things that might not be what you initially thought. All right, and so if we have any questions, we have a few minutes. Otherwise, thank you for attending our final prep workshop. We have a link in the chat for an evaluation survey, so please, it only take about a minute. So please go ahead and fill the survey out and let us know what you think. And if you have any questions, you can always contact us. My email is just katie.adams@ucf.edu. So if you have any questions about preparing for finals or this workshop, you can always let me know. And our website for SARC and all additional resources is there at the bottom. So academicsuccess.ucf.edu/SARC. Thank you for coming. And again, if you have any questions, we'll kind of be here for the next few minutes. So have a great day, everyone.